Well, welcome to Expanding Empathy 2025. This is much like last year. We wanted to close out the spring semester by having a special sort of event where we brought in people from around the world, both online and in person, for a hybrid conference and a special topic. This year, we wanted to focus on political polarization and divisions and moral decision-making. And so we will be joined today by a bunch of folks from across the social sciences and humanities and psychology, political science, philosophy, media studies, communications. It's a really interesting and broad group, and I'm really excited to have everyone here from both here and in person. There's plenty of folks in the audience, but also online as well. Just to really briefly outline the scope of the day. So we'll start off with a session this morning on victims and values with Emily Kubin, Abby Casario, Sean Laurent, who's here in person, and Scott Clifford, who's also here in person. So each speaker will go about 12 to 13 minutes or so. We'll have time for a couple of questions, but we will have some downtime throughout the course of the day for folks to talk to each other as well. After this, from noon to 1 p.m. Eastern Time, we have a session on algorithms of media and emotions. We'll have Fade Eade from Seattle, who's with us online, Chris Skirka from Media Studies here at the Belisario College of Communications at Penn State, Billy Brady from Northwestern online, and then James Floman. And then we'll take a lunch break. And without cutting into more time for speakers, I will review this later on, but we'll have a nice extensive panel and several interdisciplinary panel discussions throughout the afternoon as well. So without further ado, let me turn it over to our first speaker, Emily Kubin. So let me I'll stop sharing.
So my name is Emily Kubin. Thank you again for having me here. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at UNC Chapel Hill, as well as the University of Kaiserslautern-Landau in Germany. And today I'll be talking about this new concept that we're calling true victimhood beliefs and its role in moral and political conflict. I also want to apologize in advance. I'm recovering from a cold right now, so if I cough or something, that's from that, and I'm sorry, but hopefully it's not too disturbing. So my work really centers around the role of morality in politics in terms of how it shapes our political judgments, how we think about the political landscape, what our political values are, but also how we think about those that disagree with us, how morality influences how we think about the other side. And I come from this this viewpoint in morality research that suggests that morality is really centered on perceptions of harm, known as the theory of dyadic morality. And basically, this is suggesting that, like, when I see something or I perceive something as harmful, I also perceive it as immoral. And over the last few years, we've been kind of thinking more about this, of like, what do we really mean by perceived harm? That seems kind of like a very vague term. And we've come to a place where we realize that what we're really talking about is perceived victimhood. So when I see somebody as being victimized in one way or another, I view the act that they have experienced as something that's immoral. And so the more victimhood I see, the more immorality I see. And so stemming from this work, we're kind of suggesting that when I see something as victimizing, it can be an explanation in some situations for why our debates become especially polarizing and why we disagree ideologically on these morally, politically divisive debates. So for example, when I'm thinking about something that's really morally divisive, like abortion, you can think of conservatives or like pro-life people seeing fetuses as like truly victimized. And that's why obviously you're then therefore like not supportive of abortion policies. On the other hand, there's liberals or pro-choice people who see pregnant women who want access to abortion being victimized. They see them as individuals who are victimized, and that explains their opposing beliefs on abortion and why they support abortion. And this difference in terms of everybody caring about victimhood but disagreeing over who is truly victimized is what we argue is relevant for creating the most morally, politically divisive conflicts that we see in society today, both ideologically in terms of disagreement over abortion, but also our dislike and our animosity towards those who disagree with us on abortion. And so we wanted to kind of explore if this perceived victimhood is actually explaining when and where people end up in these really morally divisive debates. And so we asked a set of American participants about a variety of different moral judgments. And these could be things where we anticipate liberals and conservatives would agree a lot on, things like murder or animal abuse or child abuse, but also things that are more ambiguous, like capital punishment or divorce, or whether it's okay to steal from a business when you're starving. And we asked about these types of debates as well as morally divisive debates that we all well know, like gun policy and immigration and abortion. In this study, we asked participants to think about two different targets that were relevant to that topic, relevant to murder, relevant to the death penalty, relevant to abortion as an example, and say which of these two targets is more victimized in this situation. Now, the graph is kind of complicated, so I'm going to walk you through it. But basically, what we find is in situations where there's not a big political debate in our society, things like animal abuse or child abuse are not considered overly polarizing debates in our society. We're also seeing that liberals and conservatives seemingly agree on who is most victimized. So we see on the x-axis, we have two different victims that we had asked participants about. So in the case of animal abuse, who is more victimized, the abuser or the animal? The left and right tend to agree that the animal in this situation tends to be more victimized, and same for child abuse and murder. So we're seeing that they're seemingly agreeing on who is most victimized. In more ambiguous situations like the death penalty or animal testing, you start seeing more differences between the left and right, but overall, they tend to follow similar trends where there still might be some disagreement, but they kind of, in one way or another, can agree on who is most victimized. On our most divisive debates, things like abortion and immigration and gun policy, that's where you're seeing the really big differences in who the left and right see as most victimized. And we suggest that this might be kind of pointing to the important role that perceived victimhood is playing in our most polarizing divisive debates we see in society. Where we see disagreement on victimhood is also where we see polarizing debates. We also replicated these results in Germany, finding very similar results that on especially divisive debates, that's again where we're seeing the biggest disagreement between liberal and conservative participants. So taken together, all of this research is suggesting that when we're thinking about these especially polarizing debates, they're also the same places where people are especially likely to disagree over who is victimized, and that in some way is driving potentially moral and political conflict between people. And this is kind of in line with the theoretical work that my lab has been focused on related to the theory of dyadic morality. But we felt like this wasn't the whole story necessarily and wanted to consider other morality research focused on understandings of objective truth. This is kind of related to like Linda Skitka's work and others, suggesting that when we make moral judgments, we believe our judgments to be objectively true. And so we thought it wasn't just about recognizing victims or recognizing a victim, but seeing that victim as something that's objectively true and that everybody should agree this individual or this target or this group of people is objectively victimized. And this is kind of where we came to our idea of true victimhood beliefs. The idea being these are beliefs that people hold that there's victims in the world that they see, and they view that suffering that those victims are experiencing as objectively true and something that all of us should agree on. And there's many, when we're thinking about these different real world examples, things like murder, it's very likely that most people would agree that somebody who is murdered is objectively truly victimized. And in those situations, we're not seeing conflict because the left and right agree that the same target is being victimized, right? The person that's murdered. In more ambiguous situations, such as the death penalty or divorce, or morally ambiguous situations, we might see that true victimhood beliefs are less extreme. People are less likely to view the victims that they care about in these contexts as objectively truly victimized, allowing them to have room for understanding why somebody might disagree with them on that debate. But most importantly, when we're thinking about these really divisive debates, things like immigration and gun policy and abortion, that's where true victimhood beliefs, we suggest, are likely very high, but they're actually in disagreement with one another. So people have these true victimhood beliefs, but disagree with the other side, driving our really contentious, polarizing debates that we're seeing with things like abortion. So to test this idea, we asked participants this very simple measure that was based on Morgan and Skitka's work from a few years ago, related to whether the victimhood that they care about related to murder or the death penalty or abortion, whether that position that they hold feels like it's objectively true to them and that they're surely correct and that those who disagree are surely mistaken. And what we find is that overall, people think in this context of murder that their true victimhood beliefs are like the most true. They have the highest true victimhood beliefs. But what's important is that people still have substantially high beliefs connected to abortion. So they disagree on whether it's the victim is the fetus or the pregnant woman, but they see that that viewpoint or their stance on that as objectively true, more so than with more morally ambiguous situations like the death penalty, potentially explaining why abortion can become so divisive for many people. Now, the real question is like, what are the consequences of these kinds of beliefs that people hold? And what we find is that overall, when people have high true victimhood beliefs across many different types of debates or moral judgments, when they think about somebody who disagrees with them on that stance, whether it be murder or abortion or the death penalty, they show high levels of effective polarization. They're less willing to interact with that person, and they're less willing to respect that person. We've also explored some underlying mechanisms for why this could be the case, and we suggested that when somebody believes, for example, if I'm, let's just say, pro-life, and I think of a fetus, I view their suffering as objectively true, and then I imagine somebody who disagrees with me on abortion, I'm likely to see that individual as callous and irrational for ignoring this objective truth or dismissing this objective truth and not caring about the suffering, in turn driving my animosity towards them. And we've conducted a lot of different kinds of mediational analyses finding support for this. And I don't have all the charts in this presentation, but I just want to highlight that we were finding this as a mediational effect. But more importantly, I wanted to show the regressions here quickly and show that as people have these high levels of true victimhood beliefs, when they think about a political opponent, somebody who disagrees with them on this debate, they see that individual as callous, they see that individual as irrational, and they're also very cold towards that person. They're less willing to interact with them, and they're less willing to respect them. So that was studies conducted in the US, but again, we've also been replicating these studies in Germany and finding nearly identical effects, suggesting this isn't just like unique to the US. So taken together, this is suggesting that moral disagreement and our like where and when we have these morally, politically polarizing debates may be in part explained by people's true victimhood beliefs. And when these victimhood beliefs are not in line with one another and we disagree over who is objectively truly victimized, those are the situations where we're most likely to end up in these contentious debates. So now is my text situation. Let's see if this works. But yesterday, as I was making these slides, I actually came across this fantastic interview where they were talking to somebody from Springfield, Ohio, which if you're not familiar with, they had a very big polarizing debate about immigration. This is where they're eating the dogs and cats line comes from Trump, where basically Haitian migrants that have moved to Springfield, Ohio, there's a large population of Haitian migrants there, and there's been a big debate about immigration in this town. And they had an interview with a woman who was very anti-immigrant and very lived in this town and didn't want the immigrants there. But they, at the last second, at the last second, they had a really good 30-second interview with her that I think it points to solutions that we can look into. So I hope that this sound works, and I'll turn it up on my computer so hopefully you can hear it. Okay.
Bad. What do you think it would take to bring people together?
People having conversations with individuals. I mean, everybody's responsible for their own heart.
Diana Daniels says she has had those conversations, including about the very difficult journey and sacrifices many made to get here, that softened her thinking about Haitians as individuals.
I know a lot of Haitians. I have several that live next to the store where I work. I've had plenty of conversations that I wish I'd never had, because there are things I didn't want to know, but know now, that has changed my perspective. Pivoting away from being angry about an illegal being here to realizing that there were two sets of victims. They are the victims just as well as we are.
Okay. So taken together, I think that's really pointing to the next direction of this work, but also of how we can think about interventions in the future. I'm not suggesting that a way to fix this is by telling people, don't view your beliefs as so objectively true or minimize the victimhood that you care about, but instead recognizing the other side, recognizing that they themselves could be victimized or that they care about victimhood in similar ways as we do, they just see different victims. I think that could be a really promising path forward. So with that, I want to thank my colleagues, Sam, Luca, and Kurt, and also the Templeton World Charity Foundation for funding this research. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Emily. Fascinating presentation. We probably have time for one or two quick questions before we transition to the next talk. So either if you're here in person, I can pass you the mic. If you're online, you can just drop a question in the chat or the Q&A. Yeah.
Thanks, Emily. It's Mikey Pasek. I really enjoyed your talk. I guess I have a question about the causal order of things in your earlier studies. So if you think about the competitive victimhood literature that suggests that people might actually use victimhood denial of the outgroup as a way to kind of moralize lines of division, do you think it's political division that's changing how people decide who's a victim, or perceptions of victimization that are kind of leading people to line along political lines?
That's a fantastic question. And I don't think I can fully answer this. I think that this is actually something I've been struggling a lot with in the literature, especially connected to like whether victimhood in general can bring us together or pull us apart. So there's a lot of research on competitive victimhood suggesting that people can use it to gain power or status, or like hearing about the other side's victimhood is going to drive me further into like feeling it like I need to, you know, emphasize the victimhood that I care about and not like build understanding with the other side. So I don't have a fully good answer for this other than we need much more research to try to disentangle a lot of these processes, and especially what is predicting what. In this. So this is just what we have found, but I could also make the argument the other way around that division can also drive people into focusing on specific types of victimhood, but we haven't addressed this yet in our research. Yeah, great question, though. I think we need to deal with this in the field.
All right. Thank you very much, Emily.